Good afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about remediating threats with Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Thanks for joining. My name is Scott Landry. I'll be presenting and walking us through some of the content today. Our objectives are to learn about remediating threats, overcoming SOC overload through balanced approaches. We'll talk a lot about this topic. And how to effectively operationalize with Microsoft Defender. The question that I'm trying to help answer is I hear a lot of feedback that the Microsoft capabilities are overwhelming. Marketing teams, sales teams, they're always talking about the latest and greatest feature. How do we put it into practice? And that's going to be the focus today. I do have some demos prepared, but because of our limited time together, some of those demos are going to be fairly introductory. And I do apologize for the more technical folks in the audience, but I think it's important that we all understand the key features that do combine together, how they work together to help reduce SOC workload. Remember, phishing comes through Teams as well as email now. With Defender, you're protecting email, Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So we'll probably talk a lot about email because that gets the lion's share of the attention. But do be aware that Defender is protecting all of these work surfaces. All right, a little bit of context. Phishing. Phishing continues to be one of the most persistent and successful initial tactics used by attackers. About 91% or so of cyber attacks still begin with phishing email. And to give you a sense of scale, this data is about a year or two old, so it's probably actually gone way up. But we were detecting 775 million emails containing malware during that time period. I believe it's certainly over a billion now. While modern security tools do a great job at blocking the majority of these, it's inevitable that some phishing emails are still going to get through. What makes phishing challenging is how quickly the threat actors evolve and the tactics that they're determined to use to evade detection. And it only takes a few sneaking through to do damage, of course. So, what I'm essentially getting at is that protection is just not enough. You need more layers than just protection to stay ahead of this problem, right? No matter how good the software is that you own, the products, the services, et cetera, there's still response and remediation that is going to potentially be required on your part. That's why many of you have your roles that you have. If we think about this problem, it especially happens when the scale increases. So let's say the products and layers that you have in front are protecting 99%, 99.3, let's even be generous here, right? That's a pretty good catch rate. But let's say the attackers are able to throw 1,000 threats a month at you. That still leaves 7 that are going to get through, right? If you're thinking about the amount of time that it takes for a typical human to investigate those, look at the blast radius, you're talking potentially 30 minutes. It's manageable for one person for sure in a tenant of that size. Let's say the scale increases by 100. This already starts to look kind of scary, right? 700 potentially to investigate each month. But wait, there's more, because those actual 700 threats are going to be hiding. They're going to be hiding among signals that are typically somewhere between 70 to 90% benign. That means you're going to be looking at, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of alerts, messages, things that maybe they look bad on the surface. Somebody reported something, some event happened that triggered an alert, your systems caught it, but for the most part, it's benign or it's not actually, it doesn't actually require follow-up. But those 700 that do potentially require follow-up, they're still out there. They're still out there lurking. So this is the real challenge when it comes to SOC time. So SOCs are obviously overwhelmed. To stay proactive, organizations do train employees to report suspicious emails for review. And so this is a catch-22 in and of itself, right? On the one hand, you absolutely do want your users to be a layer of protection, okay? And this is very much a good thing. And by all means, we are recommending that you do train your users. However, what we have seen is this does cause another behavior, which is that the users now know how to report things, and they're going to report things that are not necessarily truly benign. Many users are going to take the time to report things that they just don't want. They're going to take the time to report the things that are bothering them, and hoping that you, the SOC team, are going to help them, right, with those gray mails or whatever. But in reality, your job is not to focus on the gray mails, but to focus on the things that are truly malicious. So let's talk about some ways that I've seen customers approach the SOC overload problem. And there's good and there's bad with each of these. Each of these can be taken too far to one extreme. And so I believe that it's an approach that involves all four of these that is going to be the best, and not too heavily one or the other, or exclusively one or two, right? We're going to actually delve deeper into each of these, but let me go ahead and introduce the concept. So the first, of course, is posture. Defense should not have holes. I think that's a given. I see lots of people spending lots of time on this one, and it's a good one to spend time on. But it's also fair to say that in our evidence, in our telemetry, and our data, we see that misses are not frequently caused by configuration, okay? There certainly are some, and some is still SOC impact. Therefore, it is definitely something that you should do because it's an easy, low-hanging way to remove things off the SOC plate, but it's not the biggest, right? And so you have to keep it into focus and not overdo it. Some things that we'll talk about Defender in particular doing, we'll talk about DMARC and Spoof Insights, Config Analyzer, and a few others. Another way that people approach the SOC overload problem is that they just keep adding more and more layers of protection. Again, not necessarily a bad thing because fewer threats is less to defend. Okay, so this is kind of intuitive. The problem is most of the layering attempts often try to focus on one specific thing, like reducing the amount of phishing email, improving the response to user submissions or something, right? And these individual products are not necessarily integrated into the whole, and they don't really necessarily think about a truly layered protection in terms of the full kill chain. Furthermore, it also kind of sets, I think, an expectation in some organizations that, hey, maybe if I layer enough of these, I'm going to achieve close to 100%. And therefore, there's not going to be as much work for my SOC to do. I can just spend money and I can throw money at the problem, and I don't have to have a bunch of expertise in my tenant. Of course, that's not true either. The other thing that we see, and the data definitely shows this, more layers of protection just means more false positives. False positives themselves are harder to automate, to mitigate, right? Because if you have a false positive, you kind of want somebody to look at it to make sure that it's okay to release it. The last thing you want is, one of your users to request something to be released. Maybe you have some automation or a quick, junior employee take a look at it. say, hey, it's good, and then it ends up not being good, right? So false positives, they're not the obvious trade-off that sometimes we make them out to be. And we already talked a little bit about complexity with multiple layers, right? If you don't have those layers integrated, it becomes more complex to operate those environments. Um, this is another big one. Reduction in threats does not produce an equal reduction in alerts, right? We talked about that problem earlier where um, maybe you only have 700 threats in your environment, right? But you do have like 7, 8, 10,000 alerts. Reducing the actual number of threats by maybe half, maybe to 3,500, which is what we might typically see with a multi-layered approach. First of all, 3,500 is still a lot, but also the number of alerts that you have to pick through to get through those 75 or 3,500 rather, they're not going to go down at the same scale. In fact, they may even go up because now you have more things alerting you and telling you about potential risk, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about layered protection when we get to that point. Automation and AI. Of course, this is the promise that we're all seeing, and I think it's finally starting to materialize. And that's reducing repetitive work through, automation and AI. Um, there are some things to keep in mind, though. Each layer of automation and protection that you add into the pipeline, into the workflow, these layers themselves are not going to be 100%. They're going to have false positives and false negatives. There's no such thing as 100% deterministic here, right? And so we do need to be aware of that and just kind of keep that in the back of our mind, right? Countless examples of products that ignore this FP problem. Let me be specific. There are some vendors that basically what they do is that they attempt to reduce the workload on the SOC by taking over some part of the pipeline and essentially telling you to turn those alerts off. They're just going to handle it for you, right? And that is fine to a degree, but reducing the signal, reducing the noise comes with some trade-offs, right? And so it's just very important to keep that in mind as you deploy some of those products and you work through this problem, right? You don't want to completely ignore that any layer of the remediation pipeline, the SOC workflow is going to be 100% perfect. But again, that's why we use layers in conjunction inside the SOC workflow as well. Also, unfortunately, one of the caveats that we're starting to see our research teams are seeing in droves is the attackers also have access to the same automation, AI, and tooling, right? And so it's becoming, I would say it's always been really kind of an asymmetrical war, right? The attackers always have the cheaper, easier job, right? They can produce attacks faster and at greater scale than the defenders can defend. And this is still true even with AI. Some things that Defender has, of course, that can help submissions, auto investigation, response. We'll spend a good bit of the presentation talking through some of these features and how they work together and how they can really help the SOC. Finally, there's signal correlation, right? And almost anybody of any size is doing this with maybe a SIM, a SOAR product, et cetera. And that is thinking like attackers, right? You want to try to build the pieces of the puzzle, put them into an attack story, raise the visibility of the actual attacks that have been successful, take those individual signals, combine them, correlate them, etc. In order to do that most effectively, again, what we don't necessarily want to do is layer a bunch of protection on one piece of the attack chain, the kill chain. You don't want 5 layers of protection in email and meanwhile leaving your desktop or your identity unprotected, right? So what you want is you want those signals to come from across the chain. Unfortunately, what we do see is that while that may be true, as teams start to piece these signals together, they're still working in silos oftentimes, especially at larger larger enterprises, right? And so that's always something we need to keep in mind. So the Microsoft Defender XDR product obviously helps pull these together, uses MITRE frameworks and such to essentially rebuild kill chains and do all this for you. Obviously, you can still pull in your third-party signals. You can pull this into a SIM if you need to, etc. But out of the box, we give you basically what you need to protect your Microsoft landscape. The way that works is alerts and evidences get combined into incidents. Okay, so as we talk through incidents later, that's the terminology that we use. Again, going back to the big picture, zero misses is not the goal. So your approach can't be exclusively about preventing compromise. It has to be very balanced. Of course, fewer phishes means fewer clicks, fewer compromises. So we can't discount that, but we want to make sure that those outer layers are doing the best that they can, but let's not sweat the small stuff. At least that shouldn't be our primary focus. We shouldn't be, there's no benefit to spending tons and tons of time looking at, you know, millions or billions of email that might be coming into a tenant. And instead, obviously, we want the humans to focus their effort in the places that really give the bang for the buck. So what that means is, uh, the security response team, they're looking for the things that were missed by those layers, and then they will feed that and push that left with other teams, perhaps. But still recognizing that there's only so much you can do to keep pushing left, because especially in the phish landscape, you can shut something down and 15 seconds later the attack has morphed and now you're starting over, right? So again, not a reason not to do it, but you just want to keep it in perspective. um, I think it's also important to look across that kill chain and find the weak spots, right? And the best way to do that is, again, keeping the whole picture in mind. It might be more valuable to invest time in your uh, identity posture, for example, than sweating a couple of fish that made it past defenses, right? Again, it may be an and here, not an or, right? If you have enough resources, but if your resources are limited and everybody's are, we have to pick our battles. Okay, so let's get into some very specific recommendations. We're going to walk through each of these 4 areas and some of the things that you can do in a very balanced approach. Um, First of all, we get to posture recommendations, and I've got a bunch up here on the screen. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but many of them you guys are probably familiar with. The first one that really stands out to me is DMARC. I know a lot of people have put off DMARC for a long time. Adoption has started picking up in recent years, but it is still a very small chunk of the overall internet that is truly enforcing DMARC. And I don't mean, like a DMARC report policy. I mean a true enforcement policy. If you don't have one, you should probably prioritize this pretty heavily, because what we see is a lot of attackers that are truly successful. They're using your own domains against you, right? Or they're using your own domains against your partners, against the people that you work with, right? And so you can lock things down as much as you want inside your tenant and say, I only want to accept email for my own domains if it's coming from this set of infrastructure that I use for sending mass emails or business emails. That's great for you, but it doesn't help all your partners and people that you work with. Excuse me. So DMARC is definitely something that I I just don't think that people take it seriously enough, and I get it. It is hard, okay, but if you're going to put in the work somewhere, if you're going to put it into locking down your email infrastructure, etc., put it in the DMARC area, because that's where the best gains are going to be, not only for protecting you, but your customers and your partners and such. Another one that I'm going to actually demo here in a second is posture and insights reports. This is something that is shipped in the product just in the last several months, and we're really excited about it because um, a lot of the reporting that has been in the product has been buried. It's not necessarily terribly actionable. What we're doing with this new report is giving you a report that is kind of CISO level or CISO -1 decision level making fodder, if you will, and but also actionable, right? So if we see something that may need action, we will go ahead and present it to you. Of course, this feature is still new, so we've only got a few insights, things that we check for, but we're going to continue adding to those. One of the others that I'm going to call out here while we're on it is helping users with bulk gray and transactional email. This is not usually the SOC team's responsibility, and I get that. But there are teams usually inside companies that are helping users with this. And the theory goes something like this: if you reduce the bulk gray transactional email, the things that the users would like to complain about, then theoretically it also starts to reduce the signals that are coming into your SOC. Basically the user's telling you that, hey, I got this message and I didn't want it. That's not actionable to the SOC, right? But if you really help those users deal with that, then we believe that it does reduce some of the SOC noise. We have in public preview a feature that I'm excited about. Everybody can go turn it on and play with it, which is our promotions feature. And it allows you to get that out of the user's inbox into a special folder. Yes, it's a folder that they have to check, but then they're not poking around in the junk mail folder. They're not poking around in the quarantine, which in essence is going to help you out, right? Because now they're not looking at some of those things that could actually be malicious. Again, definitely a feature worth checking out. So I wanted to call that one out. Let's do a quick demo of this posture and insights report. So when you go into the Defender portal, if you go to the email overview section, you'll see a report where we calculate your pre and post delivery phish and malware. This is based on just malware. It doesn't include spam. You can see how these calculations are made, and we're going to even start giving you more and more ability to go hunt and prove these numbers for yourself. But again, as you can see here, there are things that are called out as potentially risky. This particular tenant that I'm showing you right now does not have a ton of recommendations, but if you do have recommendations, they will be surfaced here. Like I said, we're going to keep adding to this, so keep checking it from time to time. This is one of those things where spending a few minutes each month kind of going through it with maybe with your boss or decision maker could be helpful. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is spoof intelligence. Actually, before spoof intelligence, I also want to call out impersonation insights. So impersonation insights is another thing that you may need to regularly look at, because basically we have AI ML in place that is checking to make sure your users themselves are not impersonated. And so you'll want to come in here once in a while and check to see who's being impersonated and whether or not it's something you want to allow. I don't think, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any in this tenant, but you'll be able to, if you do have impersonation attempts in your tenant, this is a good place to go check out. Now we're going to switch over to spoof intelligence. Spoof intelligence is great for a couple of reasons. First of all, many of you may not have DMARC fully enabled, in which case you absolutely should be in here every single day. But also, if you even if you do have DMARC, the people who are sending you email may or may not have DMARC themselves, right? And so this allows you to basically audit the things that we thought potentially could have been good spoof versus bad spoof, right? Not all spoof is inherently bad, and the spoof intelligent insight helps you get to the bottom of it. For larger customers, this is a good daily place to be, but there's also the ability to go into advanced hunting and run some canned queries there that will help you get to the bottom of things a little bit faster. Okay, now we're going to switch gears to layered protection. That's area number 2. Excuse me. Understanding the unique layers that Defender already offers you. Okay, so that's one of the things that I want to point out. So Defender, of course, if you've got it deployed, if you've got all the signals, you're going to have Defender for endpoint. You're going to have Defender for cloud apps. You're going to have identity protection. All of these signals are going to combine together, and that's going to give you some protection across the kill chain. That's just something to think about in terms of layers, right? So you already are going to have some layers if you've properly deployed Defender. But if you are looking for vendors that add significant SOC value, I'm not here to convince you that you do or don't need that. We're certainly open to it. Some people will see it as a low-cost way to reduce attack surface, as we mentioned. It helps keep their SOC teams from being overwhelmed. So it can certainly provide an extra layer. And maybe it's something you bring in from time to time. Maybe you're seeing a rise in attacks, or maybe you know your defenses are weak in some other area, and this provides some temporary augmentation or whatever. But as long as you keep in mind that it's not a magical fix, right? You have to remember that many of these vendors have pretty aggressive sales tactics, right? That are filled with bold claims, ROI statements that seem like no-brainers, but when you really kind of start to peel the onion, it's not always that simple. So the most useful insight that I can share is that we are actually trying to partner with you and help you with your decision making. We're trying to release quarterly, basically, an analysis from our view of what we see in the landscape, and we've picked some vendors that, and we try to work with these vendors, right? So it's not purely a argumentative type of deal, us presenting our side of the story. We try to work with vendors to have a more balanced and nuanced view of what we see. You know, as the world's largest commercial email provider, we have a lot of signal into who's protecting what and how good is their protection and such. And we've been very conservative in our analysis, so we hope it's something that you can trust and you can use to make your decision. Of course, at the end of the day, if you're thinking of supplementing or switching vendors or anything like that, it's going to require some work and due diligence on your part. So even getting a sample, say, of overlapping messages, maybe 100 or so, what you're going to find is you're going to find different people have different definitions of what a true positive is, a false positive, false negative, right? Something that's unwanted may be counted as phishing, right, by some of these vendors. And they may be taking a lot of credit for things that are already in your junk mail folder or were already classified as promotional. But were allowed into, you know, perhaps into the user's hands because they're not really something that you as a SOC should be concerned about, right? As truly malicious to the organization. So definitely that requires a lot of work, and I got to emphasize that because it's not easy. Let me make sure I didn't skip a slide here. Okay. Day in the life of the security teams. Of course, any of you who are doing this on a daily basis, you know this is kind of the pattern. You get an alert. You triage the alerts, you analyze them, you investigate when you find an actual potential threat, you assess the impact, and you try to contain it and respond, right? So everything we look at from here on out is going to have some element of these. And this is why, you know, potentially a single alert can take 30 minutes or more to go investigate, right? Because you're going to have to check the blast radius. You're going to have to figure out whether or not that threat is real. Not everything is automatically obvious, right? In fact, the attacks I've been seeing lately have become more and more nuanced and more difficult. Sometimes there's no payload, if you will, directly in that message, right? It's initially kind of reaching out and trying to establish contact. Oftentimes, you know, we're trained now to look for things like urgency. I saw one the other day where urgency isn't even, part of the conversation, right? They're just trying to casually, entice you and lull you into a sense of letting your guard down, so to speak. Okay. Um, so a quick word about SOC operationalization before we get too deep into some of the technologies. First of all, one of the biggest mistakes I see is deploying some sort of protection product like Defender for Office without onboarding the SOC, right? Again, as we mentioned, there are going to be misses. So the most important thing you can do to remain is to have continuity, right, at the SOC level during, before, during, and after migration, right? And so it's very important. We call this out in our migration guide, our onboarding guide, that you need to onboard your SOC early. Our entire migration strategy is built around the fact that you can turn on the alerts, you can get the alerts. The SOC can start using things as soon as the signal is good enough, right? You don't even have to flip your MX record to start getting the signal from MDO. MDO can complement your existing SEG product, Secure Email Gateway product. And in fact, we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through. Like, a lot of these features are complementary. Third-party features are complementary, right? It's not an either-or discussion. You shouldn't go turning some of these things off because you're protected elsewhere or you have another product. If you've already paid for it, and obviously, that obviously has to be part of the equation, but if you've already paid for it, don't go turning these features off. Spend a little bit of time tuning them if necessary. Work with us. We'll help you get them tuned if you're having too many, say, false positives or whatever. There is an operations guide. I admit it's a little outdated. We probably need to update it a little bit and also broaden it to include the rest of Defender. It was a project that we started not long ago, and we will continue to work on it. But yes, this operation guide does lay the framework for some of the minimum activities that we kind of suggest in terms of what the SOC should be doing, how often they should be doing, how much time they should be spending, etc. Enable submissions. Submissions are not just to help us get better defenses, but they're also here to benefit you. We'll talk about some specific ways in a minute. Submissions are frequently graded by our AI. Okay, we get so many submissions in a day that humans alone cannot triage them and look at them all. So we have kind of a layered model, and AI is looking at them first. And if you get back a verdict from the AI that you disagree with, there's a way to tell us. And again, that helps us improve, and it helps improve your experience directly. Quick demo of submissions configuration. Again, I talked about the fact that you can have multiple products. You can integrate with another user submission product, another training product if you happen to have it in your environment. You need to come in here and make sure that a copy is sent to Microsoft and that we are therefore able to triage. Most of the vendors we have worked with, they have instructions on their website too as to how to configure it to work with MDO best. Looks like, yeah, we're going to look a little bit in priority account protection. That's another thing that you want to be aware of while you're in here. And then I am also going to show you really quickly while we're here. I'll bring this up again in a minute, but this is how you control some of the base level AIR, MDO protection, automation settings, as well as Teams protection. All very important things while we're here. Sorry for the segue. I mentioned disputing a submission finding. I'm just going to quickly show you where that is because this feature has rolled in the last year and therefore you may not have found it yet. It's right here. You can click the dispute submission result button and you can see, as you can see, you can submit a reason, you can submit a screenshot, etc. that will help our analysts to understand why you disagreed with our findings. Now, how does this specifically help you? Number one, it helps you with Zap, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but it also helps through the rest of the automation technologies, as we're going to see in a second. This is overwhelming, right? There's at least 6 different technologies that we talk about regularly. If you've got sales guys, if you've seen the presentations, it's probably overwhelming. How are these things working with each other? How do they complement each other? How do they work together? That's what we're going to get into next. First, there's 0-hour auto purge, and that's the one that is most closely tied to submissions. Those submissions will directly feed into 0-hour auto purge, or ZAP. ZAP attempts to remove malicious emails that were already delivered to the inbox. There's basically an on-off control only. That's all you have. So you want to go make sure that it didn't get turned off at some point. But the best way to improve ZAP is to make sure that user submissions are enabled. Okay. Basically, here's a typical scenario. Let's say you have a message that comes in. It's not active. The payload is not active at time of mail delivery, so it evades detection. 15 seconds after delivery, the attacker weaponizes it. Okay, the user sees that. The user then notifies us, and what we will do is we will redetonate that message. We will see that the payload is in that message and it's active and it's bad. And we will immediately try to zap and remove that message and any other messages that have a similar payload. So that user submission pipeline will directly improve your zap results. I will say that zap is kind of that first layer of protection, and it requires a high degree of certainty. And because of that, it requires some indicator of compromise. We're not going to do a bunch of fuzzy hashing and fuzzy searching. We're not going to find things that are super similar. We're going to look for the closest matches that we can find. So that might be a specific URL. It might be a URL rollup if we've had enough signal from enough similar URLs that are also bad. It could be an attachment hash. It could be email hashes. We do a bunch of email hash work now as well, okay? But the bottom line is we need something that basically tells us that that is bad. Simply reporting a handful of messages as bad is not necessarily going to go clean up a bunch of other messages that are also, they're somewhat similar, but maybe they're polymorphic. You know, they have a different URL, they have a different sender, they come from a different IP. You know, in other words, the IOCs are constantly being changed. Zap is not always the best and first tool in those situations, but it does work in the low-hanging fruit kind of situation. We also use it at Microsoft to put messages back when we get it wrong from a false positive standpoint. If we have a mass false positive incident, we will typically use what we call reverse zap, or put the messages back. And we'll do so in a safe way where we reanalyze all those messages to make sure there's not some other threat. You know, even if there was one IOC that caused us to wrongly convict the message, there may be other IOCs in that message, and we need to check those as well. Let's talk about automated investigation and response. That's kind of your next layer of automated protection in MDO. Now, from here on out, I'm going to be talking about P2, E5, and other higher level SKU protections. I apologize if you're not one of those folks with these features, but we are here to talk about remediation and response today. And most of these features are included in our higher level licensing. I just want to set that expectation up front. So automation investigation and response is going to look across a number of different classes of alerts. These are some of the broad categories of alerts that it's going to look at and take action on and run playbooks. Okay, these playbooks are well-defined, hard-coded playbooks where basically, you know, when we detect a malware that was zapped, we're going to go look for other messages that may not have been successfully zapped that had that same payload. One reason for this is Zap only works for 48 hours or so after delivery. Okay, Air can keep working for a number of days post delivery. Um, Another example of this might be things that look similar, but they're not close enough to have a very specific IOC. We can do clustering, as you'll see in a second, across similar type messages. But investigation and response also starts to take some of these other signals that we have across the MDO and Office 365 landscape in terms of detecting user compromise, maybe maybe users are sending out messages because they've been compromised. A suspicious rule has been added to a mailbox that is forwarding content. Office 365 has a lot of detections, right? And we can pull those signals in and we can start to look at them just from an Office 365 perspective. If any of these alert categories are disabled, then automated investigation and response does not work. So this is one of your action items, is to go check and make sure that in your policies you have not disabled any of these. Fair enough. At some point, somebody may have said, hey, these are too noisy. We're going to disable them, right? Until we can, figure out how to auto triage them or whatever, right? It's time to go turn them back on and get some of those firing again from an automation perspective. So let's dig into some of these playbooks a little bit more closely. We are running low on time, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit here. We're going to do basically some root investigation into the message itself, or the item that was submitted. Is it a true positive? Is an event that we need to pay attention to? Is it from a known campaign? We're going to start to develop like a cumulative risk score as we start to expand and go through the playbook. We're going to expand to similar email clusters. We have a bunch of different queries that we run against similar messages with similar subjects, similar sending IPs, senders, etc. Now, any one of those things by itself is going to be filled with messages that are not actually compromised, right? But as you start to add these signals together and you start to piece these things together, then the score starts to rise, and then the likelihood of us needing to take action starts to increase. In addition, this is where we start to share signals with other platforms like Defender for Endpoint or Identity. We're able to look at, again, we have multiple layers of protection just in Defender for Office. We're going to look at time of click protection. Was the click allowed? Was the click blocked? If the message was allowed through, but the click was blocked, or the click never happened in the first place, then there's not as much, urgency or need to go clean something up. Yes, you might want to get rid of the message that was bad that was allowed through, but you don't necessarily need to go worry about a user getting compromised right away. So anyway, these layers in response do help us. And then eventually you get to the remediation phase where, again, with high confidence, we will, if you have it enabled, auto remediate things. And so some of the actions that we will take is soft deleting emails from these malicious clusters and go ahead and get them out of the inbox. These actions can be undone. They're not irreversible. And they will show up as potential recommendations for you, the SOC, to go act on. We already looked at this, so I'm going to just buzz right through it. But basically, after making sure that the alerts are on, the next thing is to look at your clustering and make sure that you understand which clustering is on in your environment. Okay. All right, now we're going to change gears a little bit away from AIR. We're going to talk about another feature in response that I like to talk about because I don't think it gets enough airplay, and that's advanced hunting, but more specifically, custom detection in advanced hunting. Similar patterns are going to show up all the time, and customers say things like, well, within those similar clusters, I'd like you to go ahead and say, for example, if we get more than 50 emails from a particular sender that are bad, we'd like to just go ahead and automatically block that sender. That's not a feature that exists in the product today. certainly one that we continue to evaluate, but I would challenge you that this feature does exist in a roundabout way, which is custom detections. What I'm saying is you can build advanced hunting queries that do that sort of thing. You can look at the results. You can first, do experiments, run experiments yourself against your own environment and see whether or not those techniques would work, those defense techniques would work. Then, if you're having good success with it, you can have the alert fire. The alert can actually contain all the information about, what did we detect and what do you need to go look at and evaluate, right? So you can have an alert that fires maybe once or twice a day, auto assign that alert to yourself if you want or whatever. And basically the alert would contain, hey, these are some suspicious messages based upon, the query that I built that I need to go look at each day, right? Okay. That's the second thing that you would do. And then eventually, after, a bunch of tuning and so on, you might turn that custom detection into an automatic action rule. This is one of those things that we continue to invest in because we do think ultimately it's going to be super powerful. But we don't see a lot of people using it. So let's see what that looks like. Here I've got a query. It's kind of crude, I'll admit, but that query looks at senders with high ratios of message blocked and then attempts to look for other messages from those same senders. Again, this is kind of the scenario that I get asked about a lot, right? And now we're going to go turn that query into a custom detection. Obviously, you're going to want to tune this query before you just go do this, but this is kind of some of the steps involved in order to turn that query into a custom detection. You can decide how often the custom detection rule is going to run and how far back it's going to look, okay? Especially if you were going to do this type of thing, you would definitely want to keep those two things in mind. Oftentimes, you're going to want to see a pattern that goes back more than an hour, but you're only going to want to apply it to messages within, say, the last hour or since the last time the detection rule ran, right? You can specify a severity, so as you're triaging or your SOC team knows how high of a severity to treat that, and also a MITRE attack. These custom detection rules, they can go across multiple tables, multiple data points, so it doesn't just have to be email. You can look across the kill chain and build things. This one in particular is just phishing, so we're going to select that MITRE attack, and you can optionally also define a threat if you wish, or a threat type, threat classification. Okay. Again, we've alluded to this a few times. XDR is signal correlation. Attackers think in graphs. So the more you enable defenders across the Microsoft suite, the more signals can be correlated. More correlation means less work, better prioritization, and it also means attack disruption gets better. So let's talk about attack disruption for a second. Attack disruption is, again, requires a really high degree of signal, because what we're going to actually do in this case is very similar to ZAP, very similar to AIR. We're going to go in and we're going to actually disrupt an attack as it's happening. And this is something where we see a signal where an attack is actually happening and we need to act quickly. And this is when we get really strong signals. It can be from one product, but oftentimes it's when multiple products have signals that are correlated. And this attack disruption can happen in seconds, faster than any human responder can. Of course, your SOC is going to want to investigate these, and they're going to want to look at these, and they're going to want to follow up on these and see if anything happened before the disruption. But yeah, this disruption is extremely powerful. You may only see a handful of these events, even in a decent sized tenant. You may only see a handful of these each month, but the ones that you do see, they're usually an indication that something pretty bad was happening, right? A user was compromised, data was being exfiltrated, and maybe some other malicious activity was happening or something, right? All right, I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time. Next, we're going to talk about Security Copilot and where does that fit in the overall puzzle. Think of it as your assistant, right? It's just there to help your SOC be more efficient, right? It doesn't replace any of your MDO protections like ZAP. It doesn't replace AIR. It doesn't replace analysts, doesn't replace humans. It's just there to help the SOC reason through what is there at faster speed, right? And so maybe you need help writing a query. Maybe you need help looking for information about an IP or a threat actor or type, and Security Copilot can really help you do those things much faster. It is still very much an interactive type of thing, and it's kind of running with your same level of permissions and scope, and it doesn't have things that would be outside of that scope. But now we're going to talk about agents, which is taking that to the next level and saying, hey, I can actually have an agent go do some repetitive tasks that need to happen frequently. I can make them happen automatically so that my SOC is not bogged down with those actions. I'm going to give them maybe a very specific scope. I'm going to give them specific permissions, what they can and cannot do. And I'm going to let them loose and run on their own, and we'll just audit the results as they come back. Just going to quickly run through the phishing triage agent. Phishing triage agent is the former name for it. We are currently in the process of rebranding it to the security alert triage agent, and it will do more than just phishing triage. We're also in the process of making it work better together with AIR and with submissions so that you get more consistent results across the three. Right now, that inconsistency can actually be a good thing as long as you're, I'd say, comfortable with the ambiguity is the way I would put it, because multiple layers, as we've said before, can be a good thing. But when you, the SOC, ultimately need the answer about whether this was good or bad, it kind of leads to a lot of questions. And I got to check 3 different places. So we are gonna work on making that experience more consistent. You can create an agent right now. If let's say we're going to create a phish triage agent specifically. This is how we would do it. We're going to click deploy the agent. And voila, we have an active agent. I skipped through some of the steps there where we define things like, what are the RBAC permissions that agent gets. And yes, this is a little bit of a marketing slide where it's kind of showing you the impact of this potential agent. But the point is that this is, again, just a force multiplier, right? It's not taking away work, it's making you work more efficiently, right? And freeing you up to do some of the higher level actions. And again, finding that needle in the haystack quickly, as we discussed earlier. All right, so there's more examples here. In the interest of timing, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're going to look at a couple more things really quickly. Just going to let some of this play. But in short, you can see that the agent is responding to a number of threats automatically. So again, if we continue to put this together as layers of protection or remediation, even post-protection, right? We've kind of built this pretty well-defined pipeline of remediation, starting with automation like ZAP, followed by AIR. At any point, you, the SOC, can step in. You can make submissions. Users can make submissions. You can triage things. You can be hunting for threats. You can trigger an investigation manually, etc. But all these different components are working behind the scenes. No single one of them is going to be perfect, right? but the more of them that you do have enabled and working, the less is going to be left over for you to do. And when you do have false positives, you're in a single tool where you can kind of piece together exactly what happened. All right. This is kind of a look at the incident graph for a more complicated phishing incident. It started as an email reporting a user as a message as malware or phish, but as you can see, as it went across the kill chain, this playbook expanded and expanded and pulled in some other information. And you can see it's able to triage at machine speed. So, all right. Basically, what we've gotten to is we've gone from overwhelmed to empowered. And so the recap here again, use these autonomous layers, build trust in them. They're not perfect, but they're going to work together. They're going to get you to the place you need to be, which is essentially focusing more on some of the threats that may have slipped past the system, or making sure that the remediation that has happened is complete, right? And that the scope of the impact was fully understood, um, and less about chasing down every single email that may have made it through. One final thought is we do have in preview, public preview, so I'm allowed to talk about it, is our project perception. And really, some of what I was just showing you with that triage agent is tied in here to this notion of project perception, which is basically we're building teams of agents that work together. Red team, blue team, and green team, they work together, and um, they work together to basically help you drive SOC outcomes, right? Like it's not just about how many alerts did you remediate, right? It's what did you do after remediation? Did you protect yourself better? Did you um, and the red team, what can it do to protect you before the attack even starts, right? And so these agents are working together. Again, not the focus here, but I just wanted to introduce the concept. As you get more and more familiar with and using the agent that we've provided you, there are going to be additional agents that roll out and help you stay protected and fix and remediate and prevent the next one. Thank you for your time today. We still have a couple minutes, so I'm going to take a look and see if there's anything in the chat. I'll stick around for a few minutes, but this ends our formal presentation. I hope it was helpful and useful to you. Feel free to shoot me. I should have put up some of my information, but you can always reach out to me, scott.landry@Microsoft, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Scott Landry. And again, I look forward to hearing from some of you. I hope this was helpful. Thanks and take care. I'll stick around as I look at some of the comments and questions. I do see one question that remains unanswered here, so I'm going to go ahead and address it. I've noticed that sometimes these alerts contain no logs, meaning there isn't enough data to manually verify the activity for that alert. Do you know why this happens? It's probably, to be honest with you, it's an oversight on our part, and I would highly recommend that you open a support ticket or provide us feedback through the portal that provides the information. If you click into the alert, there's a URI or a URL, and in that URL is a GUID that gives us the alert information. You can share that with us through the support ticket or through the feedback, and that gives us something actionable that we can go back and we can look at, because frankly, we should try to minimize the number of cases where that happens. I've seen it a few times, and it does get frustrating because then you have to go figure out, okay, what is this alert for? What's the scope? What was it doing? And that can be very challenging and take a lot of time. So yes, please give us the feedback on that. Let's see. Looks like everything else was handled, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find our survey link on the screen or in the chat, and we'll see you at the next one.